Over a century ago, in the vast, unforgiving expanse of Antarctica, one man dared to dream of the impossible. This is the story of Ernest Shackleton and his legendary Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition. Imagine a world without GPS, with no satellite phones, no rescue helicopters on standby. A world where your only companions are the biting wind, the crushing ice, and the sheer will to survive. In 1914, Shackleton set out to achieve what he called the last great polar journey, to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot, a grueling trek of nearly 1,800 miles. His ship, aptly named the Endurance, was a vessel of hope, carrying 28 men into the heart of the most hostile environment on Earth. Their goal was to sail through the treacherous Weddell Sea, land a shore party, and begin the unprecedented march across the pole. They were pioneers, pushing the boundaries of human exploration, armed with little more than wooden sleds, fur clothing, and an unshakable belief in their leader. As the Endurance sailed south, the seemingly endless ocean began to transform. The water grew thick with slushy ice, and colossal ice floes, like floating mountains, started to close in. The crew watched with a mix of awe and growing apprehension as the pack ice tightened its grip. The ship, designed to withstand immense pressure, groaned and shuddered, fighting a losing battle against the raw power of nature. The mood on board shifted from optimistic excitement to quiet tension. The sun began to disappear for the long polar winter, plunging them into months of darkness. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with the Endurance frozen solid, a tiny, helpless speck in a sea of white. The men could only wait, listening to the eerie sounds of the ice grinding against the hull, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Then, the inevitable happened. The pressure became too much. With a sound like cracking bones, the ship's timbers began to splinter. The Endurance, their home and their lifeline, was being crushed. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The dream of crossing Antarctica was over. A new, far more desperate mission had just begun: survival. They were now stranded more than 1,000 miles from the nearest outpost, with only 3 small lifeboats and whatever supplies they could salvage. The real journey had just started. This is not just a story of failure, but a testament to incredible leadership and the indomitable human spirit in the face of absolute disaster. Stay with us to find out how Shackleton led his men through this impossible ordeal. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of epic adventure. Have you ever felt truly trapped? I mean, utterly, completely, with no way out? For the crew of the Endurance, that feeling became their reality in the heart of Antarctica's Weddell Sea. Imagine this. You're in a ship, the last bastion of warmth and safety in a world of white. But slowly, day by day, that world starts to close in. The sea, once a vast, open expanse, begins to freeze. What starts as a beautiful crystalline latticework soon becomes a solid, unrelenting sheet of ice. We're watching a time-lapse of this exact moment. See how the ice floes gather, thumping and grinding against the hull. It looks almost gentle at first, doesn't it? But then the pressure builds. The ice isn't just floating anymore. It's a solid mass, a continent of its own, and the ship is caught in its grip. The vast plains of ice start to crack and shift, pushing together with unimaginable force, forming massive pressure ridges. The crew, led by the legendary Ernest Shackleton, didn't just stand by. They fought back. They got out onto the ice with massive saws, trying to cut a channel to freedom. They worked for hours in the biting cold, their breath freezing in the air, only to watch the channel freeze over again as quickly as they could cut it. Their tools, made of the strongest steel, snapped like twigs against the immense power of the ice. Back on the ship, the engineers pushed the engines to their absolute limit. The whole vessel shuddered and groaned, black smoke pouring from its funnel, trying to break free. But it was no use. The ice was too thick, too strong. The ship, a marvel of engineering designed for the polar regions, was held fast. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging them into the long, dark polar night. Hope began to dwindle. The creaks and groans of the ship's timbers became a constant, terrifying soundtrack. It was the sound of their world being slowly, methodically squeezed to death. One of the men later wrote, "The ice wasn't just cold. It was alive, crushing the ship inch by inch. You can almost feel it, can't you? The relentless pressure, the splintering wood, the terrifying realization that your ship, your home, is being torn apart around you." The Endurance groaned under the strain, its beams buckling, its masthead whipping back and forth as the pressure waves rolled through the ice. This wasn't just a ship getting stuck. This was the beginning of one of the greatest survival stories ever told. A story of leadership, endurance, and the unbreakable human spirit against the most powerful forces of nature. What happened next is even more incredible. Thanks for watching. If you were captivated by this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this epic Antarctic saga. Imagine you're trapped in the middle of a frozen wasteland 1,000 miles from civilization. The temperature is dozens of degrees below zero, and the wind howls like a hungry wolf. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was the reality for Sir Ernest Shackleton and his crew in 1915. For 10 long months, their ship, the Endurance, had been a prisoner of the Antarctic ice. They had drifted, waiting, hoping for a thaw that never came. Frank Hurley, the expedition's photographer, captured their ordeal in haunting black and white images. These aren't just pictures. They're windows into a world of crushing pressure and bone-chilling cold. You can almost feel the frostbite and hear the silence, broken only by the groaning of the ice pack as it squeezed the life from their vessel. The men worked tirelessly, pumping water and trying to save their floating home, but the force of nature was relentless. Then came October 24th, 1915. The ice, a relentless, grinding giant, delivered its final fatal blow. The pressure became unbearable. With a sound like gunfire and artillery, the ship's timbers began to splinter. The stern was forced upwards, and the keel was ripped apart. In those horrifying seconds, Shackleton's dream of crossing Antarctica shattered like glass. The ship was gone. But this wasn't the end. As the magnificent vessel succumbed to the ice, a new story began. A story not of exploration, but of survival. Abandoned on a shifting sea of ice, with only 3 small lifeboats, what followed is one of the greatest survival epics in human history. They faced starvation, frostbite, and the constant threat of the ice breaking up beneath them. They dragged their lifeboats across treacherous terrain, sailed through hurricane-force winds in the world's most dangerous seas, and made a desperate mountain crossing with nothing but a carpenter's adze. See you next time. Imagine your entire world shrinking day by day until it's nothing but a floating slab of ice. This wasn't a nightmare. It was the terrifying reality for the men of the Karluk expedition in 1914. After their ship was crushed by the Arctic ice, a group of survivors found themselves stranded on a massive ice floe, a temporary island in a frozen sea. They called it Shipwreck Camp. Their world was a canvas of white and gray. Tents made from torn sails whipped violently in the relentless wind, offering little protection from the biting cold. Inside, men huddled together, their bodies shivering uncontrollably, their faces gaunt from hunger. The silence was deafening, broken only by the groaning of the ice and the mournful howls of the wind. Hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Survival became a brutal, primal routine. Their daily ration was a single hard biscuit, a pitiful meal that barely kept starvation at bay. To get water, they would fill empty tins with snow and hold them against their chests, using their own body heat to slowly melt it into a few precious sips. The dogs, their loyal companions and partners in exploration, now looked at them with knowing eyes. The men knew what had to be done. One by one, the dogs were sacrificed, their meat providing a grim extension to the men's lives. Every sunrise revealed a smaller world. The ice floe, their only refuge, was constantly breaking apart, shrinking under the relentless pressure of the ocean. They were drifting, not towards safety, but further into the desolate emptiness of the Arctic Ocean. Each man wrestled with the terrifying thought that they were simply floating towards a slow, frozen death, hundreds of miles from land, with no hope of rescue. Their world was now a sheet of ice, smaller every day. The vast, unforgiving Arctic was their prison, and the ice, their slowly dissolving cell. What would you do in their place? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of survival. Picture this. It's the middle of the night, pitch black, and you resound asleep on a massive sheet of ice in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean. Suddenly, the world beneath you splits open with a deafening crack. This nightmare became a reality for Ernest Shackleton and his crew. One moment, they were camped on what they called Patience Camp. The next, the very ice under their sleeping bags was fracturing. A huge crack ripped right through the camp, and one of the men, Ernest Holmes, plunged into the freezing, dark water below. In that instant, pure chaos erupted. Men scrambled in the darkness, their world literally breaking apart. But in the midst of this terror, Shackleton's leadership shone through. Without a moment's hesitation, he was at the edge of the crack, reaching into the icy blackness. He grabbed Holmes, who was still in his sleeping bag, and hauled him out. But the danger wasn't over. Holmes was soaked, and in the sub-zero temperatures, hypothermia would set in within minutes. Did Shackleton let him rest? No. He did something that seemed cruel, but was actually brilliant. He forced the shivering, exhausted Holmes to get up and walk. He made him march back and forth, keeping his body moving, generating heat, fighting off the deadly cold that threatened to claim him. This single event shows the kind of leader Shackleton was: calm in the face of disaster, making tough, life-saving decisions in a split second. But this was just a preview of the true horror that awaited them. The ice they were on was drifting uncontrollably. Their destination? The most feared body of water on the planet, the Drake Passage. Shackleton knew what this meant. He wrote in his journal, if the ice drifted into Drake's Passage, not one man would survive. The Drake Passage is a violent, chaotic swirl of currents where the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Oceans meet. It's home to monstrous waves and hurricane-force winds. Being trapped on a melting piece of ice in that sea was a death sentence. The men could only watch in terror as their icy raft was pulled closer and closer to this watery grave. Their fate was completely out of their hands, subject to the whims of the current and the wind. The hope that had kept them alive for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by the grim reality that their journey might end right there, lost to the unforgiving Antarctic seas. Could they possibly escape this final, deadly trap? Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by tales of survival and leadership, make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories. Picture this: 3 small boats, battered by relentless waves, tossed around in the vast, unforgiving ocean. Inside, the faces are gaunt, exhausted, their lips swollen and cracked from the salt water and sun. For 497 days, this has been their reality. An endless cycle of hope and despair, battling storms, starvation, and the crushing loneliness of the open sea. They were sailors, explorers, castaways, their original mission long forgotten, replaced by a single burning desire: survival. Day after day, they scanned the horizon, a sliver of hope, a constant companion to their gnawing hunger. They rationed what little food they had, their bodies wasting away, but their spirits, though flickering, refused to be extinguished. They shared stories of home, of feasts they would eat, of the embraces of loved ones they yearned for. These were the ghosts that kept them going when the cold, dark nights threatened to swallow them whole. Then, one morning, a faint line appeared on the horizon. At first, they thought it was a mirage, another cruel trick played by their weary minds. But as the sun climbed higher, the line grew clearer, darker. It wasn't a cloud, it was land. A surge of adrenaline, a feeling they hadn't felt in over a year, coursed through their veins. With their last reserves of strength, they paddled, their arms screaming in protest, their hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against their ribs. The moment their worn-out boots sank into the soft sand, a wave of relief so powerful it brought them to their knees, washed over them. They made it. They had survived the impossible. They touched the solid ground, letting the grains of sand run through their fingers as if to confirm it was real. Land, at last. But as they looked around, their elation quickly soured, replaced by a chilling realization. The island was wild, untamed, with no signs of civilization. No smoke, no huts, no people. The crushing truth settled in. They had found land, but still no rescue. No hope. No one even knew they were alive. Their journey was far from over. A new chapter of survival had just begun. Thanks for watching. If you were moved by this incredible story of human endurance, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of survival against all odds. Imagine you're in a tiny 22-foot boat, tossed around by waves the size of office buildings. This isn't a nightmare. This was reality for Ernest Shackleton and his men in the Drake Passage, one of the most violent stretches of water on Earth. Their ship, the Endurance, had been crushed by ice, and this small lifeboat was their only hope of reaching a whaling station 800 miles away. Their routine was brutal. 4 hours of relentless rowing, battling freezing spray and monstrous waves. Then 4 hours of collapsing in the tiny, cramped space below deck, soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably. Sleep was impossible. They were constantly wet, constantly cold, and constantly on the verge of giving up. The sea was a relentless enemy. As the key line from the records goes, for 16 days the ocean tried to kill them. Every minute. The physical toll was immense, but the mental strain was even worse. A massive storm hit. A rogue wave flipped their boat completely over, throwing them into the churning, icy water. Miraculously, they scrambled back aboard, bailing for their lives. At one point, Shackleton, the ever-stoic leader, completely broke. He saw a bird circling their boat and just started screaming at it, a raw, desperate cry from a man pushed beyond his limits. It was a terrifying glimpse into how close they were to mental collapse. How did they even know where they were going? There was no GPS, no modern technology. They had a sextant, an ancient navigation tool. But to use it, they needed a glimpse of the sun. For just a few precious minutes a day, if the clouds parted, their navigator, Frank Worsley, would brace himself against the rocking boat, hands numb with cold, to get a reading. Their entire survival depended on these fleeting moments of sunlight and his incredible skill. Every single calculation had to be perfect. One mistake and they'd miss their target, a tiny island in the vast, empty ocean, and be lost forever. After 16 agonizing days, they spotted land. Not a welcoming shore, but jagged black cliffs and raging surf. They had made it across the Drake Passage, a feat of navigation and endurance that is still considered one of the greatest survival stories of all time. Their journey wasn't over, but they had survived the impossible. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I do, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of unbelievable human spirit. See you next time. Imagine standing at the edge of the world with nothing but a vast, unforgiving expanse of snow and ice ahead. This was the reality for Ernest Shackleton in 1916, stranded in Antarctica after his ship, the Endurance, was crushed by ice. He had already performed a miracle by sailing a tiny lifeboat across 800 miles of the world's roughest seas to the island of South Georgia. But the journey wasn't over. The whaling station, their only hope of rescue, was on the other side of the island. An island whose mountainous, glacier-scarred interior had never been crossed by a human. There was no path, no map. Just sheer icy cliffs and deep, treacherous crevasses. Most people would have given up. They would have said it's impossible. But Shackleton wasn't most people. With two of his men, Tom Crean and Frank Worsley, he began the impossible trek. They were armed with little more than a rope, a carpenter's adze, and the clothes on their backs. They climbed for hours, cutting steps into the ice, their lungs burning in the thin, frigid air. At one point, facing a dead end as darkness fell, Shackleton made a bold decision. He told his men they would slide. They coiled their rope, sat on it like a toboggan, and launched themselves into the darkness, sliding hundreds of feet down a snowy slope, praying they wouldn't plunge into a chasm. They marched for 36 hours straight. No sleep, no rest, just one foot in front of the other. Their bodies were screaming in protest, their minds numb with exhaustion. They were so tired they would fall asleep while walking, only to be jerked awake by their companions. Then, through the fog and freezing wind, they heard a sound, a steam whistle. It was the sound of the whaling station, the sound of salvation. When they finally stumbled into the settlement, they were unrecognizable. Their faces were black from frostbite and blubber smoke. Their hair was matted, their eyes wild. The whalers couldn't believe these apparitions were human, but they were. They were the first men to ever cross South Georgia. And this was just the final, desperate chapter in one of history's greatest survival stories. 522 days after leaving civilization, against all odds, Shackleton kept his promise. He saved every single man. Thanks for watching. If you were inspired by this incredible story of leadership and endurance, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of human resilience.